From ask your doctor about this dangerous drug commercials to giant lawyer billboards promising million-dollar payouts if you slipped on a grape at Walmart, American advertising is something else. If you're from the UK, your first experience with American TV can feel like you're being accosted by pharmaceutical jingles, insurance mascots, and the world's most enthusiastic fast food spokespeople. And we haven't even got to the political attack ads yet. The reverse culture shock hits just as hard. When Americans visit Britain and turn on the television expecting their usual commercial bombardment, they're met with comparative politeness. Where's the drama? Where's the man shouting about savings? Why isn't anyone being sued? The truth is, the advertising differences between the US and the UK isn't just about different regulations, though those do play a massive role. It's about fundamentally different cultural attitudes towards selling, enthusiasm, and what constitutes acceptable levels of public persuasion. Now, let's look at some facts before we get too bogged down in the existential dread of have you or a loved one ever been diagnosed with mesothelioma? This question has haunted American television viewers for decades and become something like a dark inside joke. In the States, prescription drug advertisements are so utterly normal. They're just so deeply woven into American life that people actually sing along to jingles for blood thinners during Monday Night Football. Families gather around dinner tables and casually discuss whether they should ask their doctor about medications they learned about during Jeopardy! These commercials follow a remarkably consistent formula that's become its own weird art form. First, we meet our protagonist, usually someone in their 50s or 60s, which is calculated to appeal to the primary prescription drug buying audience. They're suffering. They can't play with their grandchildren. They can't garden. They can't do whatever activity represents a full, meaningful life to pharmaceutical marketing executives. Then comes the salvation. The drug with a name you can't even pronounce. And suddenly our protagonist is transformed. They're kayaking, they're at a barbecue, they're laughing with friends in that slightly too enthusiastic way where you're like, you're overacting. The music swells. It's often some sort of like uplifting tune that makes you feel like you're about to climb a mountain rather than start a daily pill regimen. But here's where it gets truly American. While all the aspirational footage plays while grandma is finally playing catch with little Timmy, the narrator is legally required to list every single potential side effect. And these aren't minor. We're talking things like may cause liver failure, severe intestinal problems, increased risk of certain cancers, tuberculosis, low blood count, serious infections, and even death. A commercial might warn you to tell your doctor if you've been to areas where certain fungal infections are common, which is excellent information to have, but it somewhat undercuts the cheerful visual of someone confidently putting on their shoes and going to a party. Cognitive dissonance of American pharmaceutical ads is what's really fascinating. Happy people, picnics, may cause fatal brain swelling, children laughing, severe or fatal side effects may occur. It's like you're watching a horror movie and like a greeting card simultaneously. Meanwhile, turn on the TV in the UK and the only legal drug advertisement you'll see is for something that you can buy right next to the paracetamol at Boots. So something like Calpol or a hay fever spray. Now, why this dramatic difference? It's because regulations in Britain consider advertising prescription-only medicines directly to the public deeply unethical and potentially dangerous. The Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, called MHRA, and the Advertising Standards Authority, ASA, maintain strict rules that prescription medications can only be advertised to healthcare professionals, the people who've spent years learning what these drugs actually do and whether they'll kill you. The philosophy is straightforward. Patients shouldn't be diagnosing themselves based on a 30-second ad they saw between episodes of Coronation Street, then pressuring their GP to prescribe them something they've seen on television because the people in the ad looked happy. The closest you'll get to prescription drug advertising in Britain is a poster in the GP's waiting room suggesting that you might want to get a flu shot, maybe a pamphlet about diabetes management. And these obviously aren't ads, they're public health campaigns rather than product advertisement. They're not selling you a specific drug, they're suggesting you have a conversation with a medical professional about your issues. And here's the kicker. America is only one of 2 countries in the entire world that allows direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising. Now, this wasn't always the case. Until 1997, US regulations also restricted direct-to-consumer drug advertising. But the Food and Drug Administration relaxed the rules that year, deciding that television and radio ads no longer needed to include a brief summary of all risks, which would have required several minutes of medical jargon, as long as the ad mentioned the major risks and directed viewers to other sources for complete information, like their doctor, a website, or a toll-free number. So these ads that are going over the risks, these are just the big ones. This regulatory shift opened the floodgates in American pharmaceutical advertising. The pharmaceutical industry in America spends more on advertising than any other industry except automotive. During election years, only political campaigns outspend big pharma on TV ads, and to be honest, it works. Studies show that patients who see drug advertisements are significantly more likely to ask their doctor about that specific medication, and doctors, despite their training, often find it easier to prescribe what the patient requests rather than take the time to explain why drug X might not be appropriate. It's a business model. Create demand among consumers who then pressure the actual decision makers to supply the product. Critics argue this has contributed to overprescription, rising healthcare costs, and the opioid crisis. After all, those Ask Your Doctor About OxyContin campaigns were pharmaceutical advertising too. Defenders argue that these ads educate patients about conditions they might not know they have and treatments that might improve their lives. The truth, as always, probably lands somewhere in the complicated middle. But advertising madness between the UK and the US isn't limited to pharmaceutical ads. Enter the American lawyer billboard. Brazen, usually featuring a man named like Chuck or Rick, arms folded in a power pose that suggests he's personally fought and defeated entire corporations, promising justice and massive checks if you call now. And the lawyer billboard actually has regional variations. In Texas, for instance, they tend towards the aggressive. Lawyers posed with gavels, often wearing cowboy boots visible in the shot, slogans like "I'll fight for you" or "maximum compensation." In Florida, there's often a slight Miami Vice aesthetic, lots of white suits and sunglasses. In the Midwest, they sometimes go for the approachable family man angle. I'm just like you, and I've recovered millions. Some lawyers have become genuinely famous through their advertising. Jim the Hammer Shapiro in upstate New York became such a regional celebrity that people recognized him in grocery stores. Then there's Jim Adler from Texas, whose aggressive commercials feature him literally crushing cars and whose catchphrase, "That's the hammer," has entered Texas cultural consciousness. Morgan & Morgan for the People has saturated markets so thoroughly that their number is seared into the brains of anyone who's watched daytime TV in Florida. That's me. These aren't small operations either. Major personal injury law firms in America spend millions annually on advertising. Television ads, billboards, radio ads, buses, benches, shopping cart handles, basically any surface that humans might use. One Florida law firm reportedly spent over $20 million in a single year on advertising alone. That's not legal research or client services. That's purely getting their faces and phone numbers in front of potential clients. Now, in the UK, sure, you'll see some legal services available advertisements, maybe a bus stop poster for a local solicitor's firm, but if a British lawyer put their face on a 40-foot billboard in Manchester with the slogan, "I'll fight for you," arms crossed, the local press would die of laughter before the Solicitors Regulation Authority could investigate. Now, the American legal advertising phenomenon stems partly from a 1977 Supreme Court case, Bates versus State Bar of Arizona, which ruled that blanket bans on lawyer advertising violated First Amendment free speech protections. Before that, lawyer advertising was largely prohibited by bar associations as undignified and harmful to the profession. After the ruling, here we go again. American legal culture also embraces contingency fees and class action lawsuits in ways that the British legal culture doesn't. The no-win, no-fee model makes legal services accessible to people who couldn't afford hourly rates, but it also creates incentives for lawyers to advertise aggressively. They need a high volume of clients to make the model work, since many cases won't result in any payment. It's a volume business, and volume businesses advertise. In Britain, conditional fee agreements do exist, but are more restricted and were only widely introduced in the 1990s. Class action lawsuits, the kind that spawn massive advertising campaigns in America, are much rarer under British law, which doesn't have the same legal framework for the term. Now let's tackle the differences in political advertising. It's perhaps the most dramatic difference of all. In America, political attack ads are basically an Olympic sport. Presidential candidates and their supporting PACs, political action committees, launch full-scale media assaults accusing their opponents of everything from fiscal incompetence to possibly being an actual lizard in a human suit. These campaigns run for weeks, sometimes months, sometimes seemingly years before an election. In swing states during presidential election years, voters are subjected to such a relentless amount of political ads that I'm promising you they are desperately hoping for the pharmaceutical ones to come along as relief. And the tone of American political advertising has grown increasingly dark over the decades. Early political ads were relatively tame, candidates speaking to camera about their positions, maybe some patriotic imagery. Then came 1964 and the infamous Daisy ad, showing a little girl counting petals on a flower before cutting to a nuclear explosion, suggesting that voting for Barry Goldwater would result in nuclear war. It only aired once officially, but it changed political advertising in America forever. Since then, the genre has evolved into something kind of spectacular and also horrifying. Modern attack ads feature ominous music, black and white or desaturated footage of the opponent because color is for the winner. Losers get presented like they are already dead. There's always a deep voiced narrator who comes along and tells us about the opponent's failings. John Smith raised taxes 17 times. He voted against veterans, against children, against puppies. John Smith, wrong for America. Basically, hire me. Then at the end, there's the legally required I'm candidate's name, whoever is running the ad, and I approve this message. Some ads have become legendary for their effectiveness or controversy. The Willie Horton ad from the 1988 presidential race played on racial fears and was brutally effective. Swift Boat Veterans ads in 2004 attacked John Kerry's military service. By 2016 and 2020, political advertising had become so sophisticated that attack ads were basically short horror films. Television stations and battleground states essentially print money during election years, selling ad slots for premium prices to campaigns with bottomless wallets. The UK, meanwhile, sticks to short, highly regulated party political broadcasts. These broadcasts are free and allocated to political parties based on electoral support. They typically run 5 to 10 minutes, air on all major channels simultaneously, and follow strict rules from Ofcom about content. British political broadcasts are kind of boring and kind of awkward in the best way. Politicians aren't always natural performers, and the format, which is essentially a short film the party has made about themselves, does result in some pretty awkward content. You might get a party leader walking through a hospital to show they care about the NHS, talking to carefully selected normal people who are definitely not actors, or simply standing in front of a bookcase telling us about economic policy. The tone is very earnest. It's not over-performative. British television also follows rules of strict impartiality. It basically means that parties get equal broadcast time and news coverage. The idea of one party simply buying vastly more airtime than another through ads is antithetical to British electoral culture. There are no political ads in the American sense on British television outside of these regulated party political broadcasts. No PACs buying slots during Coronation Street, no attack ads during the football. Now, why such a difference? It comes down to regulation and philosophy about democracy. American campaign finance law, particularly after the 2010 Citizens United decision, allows essentially unlimited political spending through PACs and super PACs. Combining this with the First Amendment tradition that views political speech as nearly sacred, and you get an environment where political advertising is largely unrestricted and volume is limited only by funding. Britain views elections differently. They're a civic exercise that should be fair and not simply won by whoever has the most money to buy advertising. Political advertising on TV is banned except for those party political broadcasts, and even those are regulated. The idea is that democracy shouldn't be for sale to the highest bidder or reduced to those who can run the most ads. It's not that British politics is always more civil. Parliament's Prime Minister's questions is basically theatrical combat, but it's that there's a shared commitment to keeping elections from becoming pure spending competitions. Whether this results in better electoral outcomes is debatable. kind of, but it certainly results in less advertising-induced trauma for voters. And what's the overall result of all of these different types of ad? Watching American TV as a Brit must feel like you're wandering through a very loud supermarket, the kind where every aisle has a different salesperson yelling at you with a megaphone. Every product is having a mega sale. All of them insist that your life will dramatically improve if you just buy now, call now, act now before this limited time offer expires. Actually, it doesn't expire for the next 17 years, but that's another ad technique. American advertising, and Americans in general, exist at a baseline volume that would be considered aggressive in a British context. Everything is the best, amazing, revolutionary, game-changing. Every sale is the biggest event of the season because there's somehow 47 seasons in the American retail calendar. Even ads for mundane products adopt this intensity. American insurance commercials have become mini sitcoms with recurring characters like the Geico Gecko or Flo from Progressive. They run during every sports broadcast, every primetime show, every conceivable moment. The message is that insurance is exciting, it's fun, it's something you should think about constantly. British advertising, by contrast, values understatement. There's a cultural discomfort with being too enthusiastic about selling something. British ads often use irony, self-deprecation, or humor to create distance between the product and the sell. This is quite good, we suppose, is kind of the tone they're going for. Famous British ads have succeeded through cleverness rather than volume. The Cadbury Gorilla playing drums to Phil Collins, the Guinness Surfer ad, John Lewis Christmas ads. These ads work because they trust the audience to be intelligent and they don't yell. Yelling doesn't work in the UK. They suggest rather than demand. When British ads do become more American-style aggressive, they're often mocked or become camp. There's a cultural resistance to the hard sell, a sense that if you have to shout about how good your product is, it's probably not that good. And again, it's because Americans are comfortable with selling and being sold to. I love an infomercial. There's no shame in selling in America. It's commerce, it's capitalism, it's the American dream. If you have a good product, you should tell people about it loudly until they buy it. That's not crass in America, that's good business. The lawyer who advertises most aggressively gets the most clients. The pharmaceutical company with the catchiest jingle sells the most prescriptions. The politician who spends the most on ads has the best chance of winning. British advertising on the other side of the pond is just totally different. It reflects different values: restraint, skepticism about enthusiasm, distrust of anything that seems too good to be true, and a deep cultural commitment to not looking too keen about anything ever. And I say that in the nicest way possible. The British instinct is that if you have to advertise too hard, your product probably isn't that good. Quality should speak for itself, quietly, and without making a fuss. There's also a philosophical difference about vulnerable populations. British regulations especially protect children, the elderly, and those with medical conditions that might be exploited by advertising. The thinking is that some people shouldn't be marketed to because the power imbalance is too great. Americans tend towards the buyer beware concept, believing that individuals can make their own informed decision and that restricting advertising restricts freedom. Now that brings me to the end of this video. As always, leave your thoughts below. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.